Congressman Jerry Litton believes that a democracy depends on informed people. He also believes our government should be more open and accessible to the people. To better inform you of what is happening in your government, Missouri's 6th District Congressman Jerry Litton invites Washington personalities to come to Missouri each month and join him in an unrehearsed, question and answer, open to the public town meeting to discuss key issues facing our nation. Dialogue with Litton brings you closer to your government and Washington closer to you.
Normally we have a politician here who is an experienced politician, and so it should be interesting today to have someone from the freshman class, someone with new ideas, and someone that will teach us a little bit more about our government, a side that we haven't seen before. We have 94 new freshman members of Congress. They've been making a lot of changes in the United States Congress. What do you think of these bright new faces?
Well, I'm proud of them because having been a school teacher, I know how much good common sense young people have.
Do you think the changes they've been making are good ones?
Yes, I'm glad they've had the courage to step out and do some of the things, and we're particularly proud of our Mr. Litton.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
What do you think's going to take place here today? What do you think the people think about all of these fresh new faces in our Congress?
Well, I think they're proud of them, and they should be, and I think they're beautiful, and I think we need more.
Oh, thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Mr. Grishaw,
Yes.
what do you think of the 94 new members that we have in our United States Congress here today?
Well, I think it's great. I think we need some bright new faces and some bright new ideas to
They've
make
been
statesmen out of some of our congressmen and senators.
They've been making a lot of changes. You know, they came in and changed the seniority system in our Congress, and 4 of the powerful chairmen of the committees now have stepped down. What do you think of this?
I think it's great. I think a man ought to be placed in them positions according to their ability rather than the time that they've served.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
What do you think of the fresh new faces we have in Congress?
I think it's fine, but I would hope that they could become more cohesive and get more done. They have the opportunity, they have the mandate, and they have the strength. I'm surprised they haven't accomplished more, but I'm sure they will.
I think Tony DePardo is ready to introduce the congressman now, so I'll turn the program over to Tony.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our host, Dialogue with Litton, Congressman Jerry Litton.
Are you ready for another dialogue? Ready? We wanted in Watergate, we put up with impeachment proceedings and shortages, neither of which most Americans had ever had before. Then we had the Middle East crisis and the energy crisis and the food crisis, coupled with a good many foreign setbacks. And a lot of people were unhappy and upset, and because of this, they wanted a change. And they expressed this change at the ballot box when they elected 75 new freshman Democrats to Congress. And those new congressmen came to Congress with a mandate, many of them thought, to bring about change. And from that change came an immediate assault on the seniority system. And from that, 3 of the highest ranking, most powerful members of Congress lost their chairmanships to committees. They continued their assault on some of the old way of doing things in Congress, including making some reforms within the structure of the House. There's some talk now they may have as their next target the Speaker of the House, Carroll Hubbard. But I thought you would be interested in talking to one of the freshman Democrats, and this one in particular was president of the freshman Democratic class. He's a congressman from Kentucky, 1970, named one of the most outstanding young men in America. Served in the Kentucky Senate for 7 years. If you would please give a warm Missouri welcome to Congressman Carroll Hubbard from Kentucky. Carroll, come on up. Carroll, while you're getting your microphone on, I'd like to introduce somebody that I've seen you with from time to time. Gives you a bit of help from time to time, perhaps some political advice too. Let's welcome his wife, Joyce. We've got microphones scattered around the room, Carroll, and we really never know precisely what questions are going to be asked. We'd like to ask the people to come forward, ask your questions.
Congressman Hubbard, Kansas City Congressman Bowling, who has been active in congressional reform himself, recently in a newsletter to his constituents, in describing the feelings of many freshman congressmen toward President Ford, used the word hatred rather than simple policy disagreement, as if President Nixon were still in office. To what extent do you feel any hatred exists?
Well, personally, as the one who's had the privilege this year to serve as chairman of these freshman Democrats, I have a high regard for President Gerald Ford. I'm a Democrat and he's a Republican, but in my opinion, at this particular time in our history, we need less friction between the major parties. We need less friction between the President and Congress. We should be working together as Americans first and party people second. And I have met with him on 2 occasions, once for 15 minutes in the Oval Office. And I have a high regard for him as a conscientious, dedicated American who's trying to do a good job in the most difficult period of our history.
I don't think there's any room for anybody to hate anybody, especially the President of the United States. We can disagree with him from time to time. I think a lot of the freshmen came in anxious to bring about change, Carroll, and certainly your group did. And one of the first things your group did was succeed in bringing about reforms within the Democratic caucus. There were many successes early with the freshman class. And then came the hardcore business of legislating. And 4 key pieces of legislation that had required hours and days and weeks of work were completed, sent to the White House, and vetoed. And I think this has to create a feeling of frustration on the part of a lot of the freshmen who were just not accustomed to putting in weeks and weeks of legislation and then see it all vetoed.
I think that I approve of selling some of our grain to the Russians. But I do have one question. I would be interested to know whether the Russians are paying the same rate of interest that Americans pay.
Well, this particular sale of wheat involved a straight cash sale. And the sale that occurred in 1972 involved not only a subsidized sale of some $337 million, but it involved a credit sale as well. There are many differences in the sale that's taking place now as opposed to the sale that took place in 1972.
I'm a farmer from Rosendale, Missouri. I've got a little thought to pass along on the same line this lady had here. I noticed in the paper the longshoremen are refusing to load this grain for Russia. Are the longshoremen going to be the deciding factor on how much product American farmer sells and to whom? And on the other hand, we've got something like 10% unemployment in this country now. I'm sure part of that 10% would be glad to go to work down there.
I'm not too fully aware of the longshoreman problem as to the transport and the sale, but I would say that I would agree with you that we've got unemployment problems in this country, and certainly they should be thinking of the country first and certainly about the economic impact that their delay or refusal could bring about, and hopefully this can be avoided by their own sharp thinking. But if they're unable to do that, well, then I hope that the President or that others take action to see to it that this longshoreman's refusal will be turned back and not allowed to happen.
I read in the paper just the other day that Secretary Butts had talked to the longshoremen and said Secretary Butts had used some pretty solid language and the longshoremen had some pretty solid language. I'm sure if you get out in the country around amongst a bunch of old farmers, you're going to hear some pretty solid language on this question too right now.
I'll tell you what I think. I think the longshoremen ought to stick to the ships and lead foreign policy to somebody who knows more about it than they do.
Agreed.
They have a contract. and they should honor their contract, and they should let people that know something about foreign exports and foreign policy deal with it. And I'm not attacking the unions, because I think it's unfair and I think it's unfortunate that the longshoremen have taken ill-advised action that not only is harmful to the agricultural community of this country, but drives a wedge between the working men and women of America and the unions of this country and the farm population. And there's an awful lot of legislation that helps the working men and women of this country, that also helps the farmer, and vice versa. An ill-advised action like this on the part of longshoremen in an area where they're not well acquainted separates these two segments of our society and doesn't do either of them any good. And I think it's unfortunate. I've conveyed this feeling to the leaders of the unions in Washington, and I, in so doing, also used some salty language.
When the freshman class was elected, there was a lot of talk that there would be many, many reforms. Are you happy with the number of reforms that we've had, and what do you see as your next move?
Well, certainly I am very happy with the reforms that did take place early in the session, because I sincerely believe that we do need some new blood, some younger blood in these capacities of chairman of these most important committees. You saw before you recently Chairman Henry Royce of our Banking Committee, who's a dynamic man and has lots of vision and enthusiasm, and he replaced a wonderful statesman from Texas who has been in Congress 48 years, and he is 81 years old, and I speak of Wright Patman. I am fond of Wright Patman and admire his activities through the years in Congress, but I sincerely believe that Henry Royce is a more dynamic chairman of our committee than would have been Wright Patman during this session.
So I noticed that the freshmen didn't take credit for the change of the chairmanship of Ways and Means.
No.
The Argentina firecracker took care of that one.
Right. The freshman had nothing to do with it. I assure you of that. But I'll tell you what, Mrs. Fox did...
I've never heard her call Mrs. Fox. Go ahead. Most of us think of her as Fanny, but you're right.
I was trying to be conservative here. But Mrs. Fanny Fox did have a lot to do with the overthrow of the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and certainly after he was deposed, it became easier to change some others.
I never thought of it that way.
Personally, as a freshman Democrat, I would say to you that I think these 10-day recesses that we take every time we have a holiday come along are a bad mistake, and I'm happy that your dynamic young Congressman Jerry Litton and I are among the few in Congress who have voted against each and every one of those 10-day recesses, and Jerry Litton and I also voted against the month-long vacation that we're in right now. Some of our congressmen are in China and Brazil and Russia and other parts of the world. Some of them are vacationing in Puerto Rico and Miami Beach, and then there's others of them who are in their districts trying to work. But I would say to you that many of the freshmen are very concerned and upset about the fact that when we have Lincoln and Washington's birthdays, why, Congress goes home for 10 days. And personally, I believe that Lincoln and Washington, if they had a voice today, would say, Congress, stay in Washington and sing happy birthday to them. Another statement I would say as far as our freshman goals, certainly a majority of the freshmen, along with Congressman Jerry Litton and others, were among the 213 that voted no on that pay raise that Congress passed themselves last week. And certainly this is a poor time for Congress in 2 days' time, the Senate one day and the House the next, to pass a pay raise for themselves and call it a cost of living increase. I personally knew, and Jerry Litton knew, what congressmen make when we ran for the office. And I was not in favor of increasing the salaries of congressmen at a time when there's 10% unemployment in this country and when the great majority of the American people make a whole lot less money than we in Congress do. I think it was poor timing, poor judgment on the part of Congress, and just as I read in U.S. News and World Report coming here today, the headlines were, Congress votes themselves a pay raise and goes home for a month's vacation.
Maybe the country's better off when we're not in session. Do you ever stop and think about that?
They don't know whether to applaud or not.
No, they don't. You know,
they want to be kind. I don't know.
Carroll, you know, I think the real problem on the pay raise, and I had several things that bothered me. In the first place, you and I and the other 433 members of Congress are the ones that are better able to handle and solve the problems of inflation than anybody. Congress are the people that should be handling the problems of inflation. But instead of doing that, all they did was protect their salaries against the inflationary problems. And someone asked me, they said, well, aren't their costs going up? Well, they are, but so is the cost of living for everybody in America. And I think that congressmen ought to feel the pinch of inflation, just like everybody else, to give them some reason to want to do something about it. Now, with this pay raise and a cost of living clause, all America can be hurt with inflation, but congressmen are not. Congressmen are not. Inflation continues to rise and rise and rise and hurt everybody, but it's not going to hurt members of Congress because they've got a cost of living clause in their salary. And I think that's a sad state of affairs to have exist. And that's one of the main reasons why I voted against it.
Jerry, as you know, I'm in the North Kansas City School District and possibly the largest in your district. And I have been asked many, many times what your opinion on school busing is.
And I indicated when I first ran for Congress, and I've said that several times since, that you'll find that I am a liberal in terms of issues affecting minorities and blacks because I think they have not had an opportunity all down through the years. And in most cases, you'll always find that I'm voting for blacks and for minority groups, with the exception of busing. And I made that clear when I first ran for Congress. I've voted against busing ever since. But I do think that we have a responsibility in an affluent society such as ours to see that we have high-quality education throughout the United States. And it's not right that some young people, because of their location of birth or where they happen to live, have an education beneath that of other young people a half a mile away. That needs to be corrected, and we ought to see to it that we have high-quality education everywhere. That indeed is a responsibility of the federal government to involve itself in that, to see that everybody has a good quality education. We need to see people can live where they want to live, work where they want to work, go to school where they want to go to school, but to try to force people to go from here to there, I think is illogical.
Here I'd like to add to what you said by saying that in Louisville, Kentucky, the courts have declared that busing must take place during the coming school year and in future years, and it will begin later this month in the city of Louisville. My own nephew will be bused when he reaches the second grade 15 miles away from their suburban home all across Louisville to the western part of that city. And I agree with you that busing of school children for any reason across imaginary lines is indeed ridiculous.
I think it's unfortunate that we've spent so much time as a nation talking about busing and less time talking about employing minorities and blacks. The unemployment rate of the blacks in this country is just unforgivable. Right. And they need better education, better job training, and we spend all of our time talking about busing. They don't want busing, they want jobs. They want good education. They want economic opportunities for businesses. They haven't had that. We spend all of our time talking about busing. They're not interested in that. They're interested in good schools. They're interested in jobs and economic opportunities. And they haven't had that, and they're not getting it right now.
Certainly, I'm sure that you have, as I have, fought for quality education for all black and minority students, seeing to it that in Kentucky or Missouri or anywhere else in this country, that no student, regardless of their color, has a secondary education.
While we're talking about this, we have some people that are here I'd like to introduce. I don't know where they are. They're the officers of the North Side Young Democrats of St. Louis, black Young Democrats. The officers are all here. And let's get them to stand. Let's welcome them to North Missouri, wherever they are. Here they are, right back here. I might add something about what these young people are doing. One of the things that concerns them, and it concerns an awful lot of people in America, is the fact that an awful lot of black leaders have been only interested in payola and payoffs for political endorsements. And these young people here are highly educated, they're articulate, they're knowledgeable, and they're interested in pursuing political objectives and supporting candidates who are interested in legislation that benefit the entire black community, not the leaders who for X number of dollars will support certain candidates. That's the kind of politics we need, and that's why I'm glad they're here today.
But is there any chance of Congress coming up with additional aid to the schools to kind of help balance out some of the problems that we're having?
I don't know what's going to come out of the Congress except to say that every time there's been an opportunity to increase the percentage of federal aid to education, I've supported it primarily because of my philosophic belief that we need quality education throughout, and the one way we can level it out is the involvement of the federal government in funds into areas where they're not quite so fortunate. So I would hope that we could increase the percentage. What Congress will elect to do, I don't know. But there's so much waste in so many other areas. Certainly, I think education should be a priority issue. Like Carroll.
Right, I would sure agree with that. I will continue to support education as a member of Congress. The future of this country depends upon our young people and the type of education we're able to give them. And when you talk about school teachers, I would tell you that my mother is a school teacher, has been for 38 years, and soon will be a retired teacher, and my wife taught school for 2 years before we had our first child. But selfishly speaking, I'm for the teachers, you understand? But believing it to be the right thing. In fact, I do not see how, in Kentucky at least, men can make enough money teaching school to provide for their families.
It's interesting to note that the amount of money spent in the United States for dog food, cat food, and pet food about equals the total federal budget for elementary and secondary education. It's a matter of priorities, I suppose.
One comment, Kentucky teachers are paid more than Missouri teachers. Also, we have a problem of the people in the state saying we want to control our own educational system, which is beautiful, the local people saying this. Does it necessarily mean that if Congress does increase monies to the school system, the local school districts, that they are going to also increase added controls?
I would hope not.
Does it have to go along together?
I would hope not. I think the people in St. Joseph know more about educational problems in St. Joseph than we do in Washington.
You both speak of reform and employment and unemployment. I would like to know your feelings on the current welfare situation.
The food stamp program is being abused by people who make $10,000 a year and they're getting food stamps, and they're going out and buying their food through food stamps off the taxpayers of this country, when the program was intended for those who absolutely could not work and who did not have food to feed their families, and yet this program is being abused with hundreds of thousands of people on good salaries using this program just to subsidize themselves with food. I know of one family in my hometown who were told that they couldn't buy dog food with their food stamps, so they bought the dog steaks through the food stamp program. And we've got one woman in my hometown that's got 10 illegitimate children, and my, what a system we have in this country when we reward the mothers of illegitimate children and don't give a fair amount to the mothers who have their children in wedlock.
Food stamps cost this country in 1969, it cost us $250 million. This year, it cost $200 million just to administer the program.
Well, then why isn't there ever anything corrected or anything that is passed that will do away with this type of system?
I have a bill on food stamps, too, and we've got that one about finished.
The American image worldwide has been suffering for a number of years. Is the use of U.S. military weapons by Turkey such a transgression that the U.S. House of Representatives can continue to allow the embarrassing occupation of our military bases? In other words, what does the Senate know that the House apparently doesn't or chooses to ignore?
I don't know how you voted on that Greek-Turkey situation. You and I might have a debate right here.
Well, I'll tell you what, down in far western Kentucky, where I represent 488,000 people, we don't have any Turkish-Greek fight. It's just Hatfields and McCoys. But didn't hear from the folks back in Western Kentucky on that issue, but I did go along with the thinking of President Ford and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger.
There's 10,000 Greeks in Missouri. I don't know of a single Turk anywhere. And a good many of those 10,000 Greeks wrote me letters. And an awful lot of them out of St. Louis wrote and called. And many of them made it very clear that whether or not I sought state office would depend upon my vote on that issue. And I had to decide whether I was going to vote to please them or vote to sleep well that night, and I voted to sleep well that night. And it's a tough vote. The Turkish people have bought and paid $183 million worth of weapons. Bought and paid for it. It's theirs. They not only have paid for it, but it's in storage in this country, and they're paying storage on it. They don't want any aid. They don't want any gifts. They don't want any help. All they want is to get the munitions that they have bought and paid for and are paying storage for in this country. We've got 7 bases, important bases, as you know, in Turkey. One terribly critical of the monitoring of missiles in Russia with regard to whether or not Russia keeps their part of the SALT II talks agreements. We have 18 supporting bases on top of those 7 bases. And I realize the pressure from those groups to vote the other way. But I thought our national defense was more important than votes, and I'm glad to know that you and I voted together on that. But the majority of the House did not see fit to support the position you and I took. We slept better.
Let me confess that many times during the first 7 months, not knowing for sure the right way to vote on an issue which is complicated and which has many ramifications both ways, I from time to time admit that I look up at the board in the House of Representatives to see how some congressmen in whom I have much faith and confidence have voted on that particular issue. And many times, several of us as freshmen in the 94th Congress, having a high regard for Jerry Litton, have looked up there to see how he voted, and I often have voted along with you, and you didn't realize it. I must admit that I didn't look to see how you voted on that one because I had my mind made up on that one. But we have many times, and I say that not as one who's any close friend of Jerry Litton because we don't know each other that well, and he's invited me here to speak for the freshman Democrats. But I have heard many of the freshman Democrats speak very highly of you, Jerry, and we congratulate you on the good job you're doing in Congress.
Appreciate that, Carroll. We hope you come back next month when we're again going to have an interesting, exciting guest and a lot of discussion about what takes place in our government. If you can't come here in person, and I hope you can, be sure to follow us next month on the 20 television and radio stations that carry Dialogue with Litton. Be with us next month. And Carroll, thank you very much. Join us for Dialogue with Litton.
Each month, Missouri Congressman Jerry Litton invites a well-known Washington figure to come to Missouri and join him in an unrehearsed 2-hour question and answer open to the public town meeting. This has been a 30-minute edited portion of this month's meeting. Dialogue with Litton is presented monthly on this station to keep you better informed about your government.